Hi, everybody. In this edition of the Dr. B Show, I interview Nanette Miner. She is a training doctor. It's a great opportunity, great interview. We discuss the difference between exit strategies and succession planning, and it's an amazing conversation. Enjoy. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Dr. B Show. I'm here sitting with Nanette Miner, right? Did I say that correctly? Sí. Muchas gracias. Thank you for being here today. So thank you so much for being on my show.
I'm happy to be here. I can't wait to talk to your audience.
Awesome. Let's jump right into it. So tell everyone about yourself.
Oh my gosh, like from birth or?
In 60 seconds.
Okay, 60 seconds. I've been self-employed for 33 years. I was meant to be self-employed, I think, because both my parents were. So it's like the model that I saw. So I had a job. I got laid off in 1991. I went for outplacement counseling, which was a thing back then, but I haven't seen anybody do that in decades. And the counselor said to me, "What do you want to do?" And I said, well, in 10 years, I want to become self-employed. And he said, why 10 years? And I said, because I'm not old enough now. And he said, who told you that? And I sat back in the chair and I was like, yeah. So I became self-employed very young. I like to say I've done 2 pivots and 1 pirouette, but everything I've done has been about people development and performance improvement in the workplace.
I love it. And we'll get into that more, right? So thank you
Yep.
for that. I'm big on education, as you know. I think we all
Same.
your PhD, DBA in my case. So you went to Post University, Polytech Institute, and how do you pronounce it? Rensselaer?
Rensselaer.
Rensselaer.
Yep.
I'm the worst. I'm the worst.
How to spell it is the real challenge.
Exactly. That's like a quiz, right? And Nova Southeastern University, right? So how did all this education help you in what you're doing today?
So it looks like there was a plan, but it really all came together very accidentally. I didn't really want to go to college, but I also didn't really want to get a full-time job. So I went for a general business degree because I didn't have any aspirations to do anything. So you can't go wrong with general business, right? So that was the first degree. When I finished college, I was working in hospitality, which is a fancy way of saying I was a bartender. And I worked for Radisson Hotels. I worked for a franchisee of Radisson Hotels. And they had me for the first year I was out of college, traveling around the state of Connecticut, which is where I grew up, opening other hotels from the one that I'd originally started with. I did open that hotel, so I had that experience. And then as they opened other ones in the state, I would start the food and beverage department. I would do all the hiring, all the training, stick around for 4 or 6 months through the attrition period that always happens, make sure that they're on solid footing, and then they would send me off to another hotel. And that's when I realized I really like training people. I like when the aha light bulb goes off over their head. I liked to make things a lot simpler. I'm very good at like analogies. When people go, oh, this is too complicated. I'm like, no, it's just like this other thing you already know how to do. It's not a problem. So I decided I would go back and get a master's in training and development. The college, Rensselaer, that I chose really didn't have training, but they had human resource management with a concentration in organizational development. So that's what my degree is in. I never have worked in HR. I've always been on the OD side, how to develop the organization. And then probably so I stopped doing training and I started doing instructional design because I was very good at it. And because the training that I was doing now as a contractor for other companies, I realized this is designed really poorly. And I would have to redo other people's designs so that I knew that my students got it and would actually go out in the job and change their behavior, because that's why we do workplace training, right? It's not to like just make you more knowledgeable and go, oh, I hope you use that. So I was redesigning other people's training. And I thought, you know what? There's a lot of good facilitators out there. And apparently not a lot of people who do good design. So I started doing instructional design. I wanted to become a college professor. To your point, I loved education. I didn't want to go to college, right? But I loved college when I got there. So I always tell folks, if your kid doesn't want to go, just tell them to hang in there for like a year and see if they don't change their mind. So I wanted to be I wanted to teach college and do the consulting on the side. And at that time, which was back in the 90s, you could not teach college if you didn't have a doctorate. Now you can. Now you can, as long as you're teaching somebody who has 1 degree less than you can teach college, but you couldn't at the time. So I went through the whole process of getting a doctorate and taught for 6 years as an adjunct and realized I don't like to teach. It's not that I don't like to teach. I love to teach. I don't like the college environment. It just grinds on so slowly. And the corporate environment is ridiculously fast. They want something like by next Tuesday. And I always say, you just thought this up now? So I haven't found a happy medium between those. But when I was getting my doctorate, I said to my friend, what do you think I should do, instructional design or adult learning theory as my doctorate? And she said, I think you already know everything there is to know about ISD and you do it very well. So you'd probably be bored. So why don't you take a degree program in adult learning? And at least it's going to enhance your understanding of how workplace learning happens. So that based on that one person conversation, that's how I chose my doctoral study. But that worked out great because I have half dedicated my life to teaching people who are trainers how adults learn, how to design training for the workplace, how to make sure it's much more about them and less about you. Because most people who are trainers, and I'm sure you'll attest to this, became trainers because they were the best one at what they did, right? They either became the manager or they became the trainer, but they don't know how people learn. They started as a subject matter expert and then they became a trainer. So I've now kind of dedicated, it's not a line of business, but it's kind of like my sub passion is let's help everybody to be better at explaining how things are done and getting people to learn so they change their behavior on the job.
I love it. I think you and I are very similar, which is kind of scary. Like I didn't want to go to college, but I want to be a wrestler. But I got injured, and that's what happened. So fate, as fate would have it, I actually discuss it in my book how I went from wanting to be a wrestler. I said, you know what, my mom wanted a piece of paper, so I went because of her. And then I kind of liked school, and then I said, you know what, after the masters, then I got injured, and then I had friends in the business. The grind, it was like only like top 1% make it to the WWF or WWE, as they call it now, and
Yeah.
and I said, you know what, screw it, I'll just stay a fan. So, very similar. And then
Very
and then
similar.
yeah, and then I taught adjunct for a very long time, and I just same thing like you. I didn't like I just felt the ROI wasn't there as far as my time, the grading, and all that, and I'd rather work corporate training. At least it's a fast pace. A lot of implementation, and as you know, is very bureaucratic, and it takes years to change curriculum. I was like, you know what? Let me just pivot and help entrepreneurs. So we were very
Yes.
similar in that vein, right? So cool.
Yes.
Yeah. So when it comes to volunteer, speaking of volunteerism, you volunteer for SCORE and also for leading and lead judge. Why volunteer? Why give back?
So the Learning Elite Judge is a award that Chief Learning Officer gives out every year. I did that for 2 or 3 years, and now they won't let you judge if you're not an internal practitioner. So I can't judge anymore. But I loved doing that. You would get 2 or 3 submissions, and they would have hundreds. And it kind of followed a 15-point format or something, but you just got such a great peek inside of what generally world-class organizations were doing with their curriculums and their reward programs. And I did it because I wanted to learn what the best companies were doing, but it was also fascinating. To do the work, to give back like I could as I was able. And then SCORE, which doesn't stand for anything. Any of you out there who go, oh, I heard of SCORE, it doesn't stand for that anymore. I wouldn't even tell you what it stands for. We should come up with a new name. But SCORE is America's Small Business Mentors. We do it for free. We're funded by the SBA, but not very much. And so we're just a bunch of volunteers. There are about 30 in my local chapter. There are 6 chapters in South Carolina where I live. And I just love it. I love giving back and helping generally new entrepreneurs. The philosophy or the expectation of SCORE is that it's somebody who's starting brand new in a company, and so we're helping them figure out what kind of incorporation and checking accounts and all that kind of stuff. I find that the folks that come to me have already started a business and are probably 2 or 3 years into it, and then they've kind of hit the end of their knowledge, right? And they're like, okay, well, that's all I know how to do. I need somebody to coach me, to get bigger and better. So I love it. Every Friday afternoon, I coach people for free for 3 hours.
I love it. I'm very knowledgeable with SCORE and the SBDCs, so I'm very familiar with that as well. So
We
I
are the
do love
same
it.
person.
We are the same. It's kind of like scary. So you are the training doctor, right, for over 30
Yeah.
years, and as a management consultant and succession strategist. So what do you do as a succession strategist and management consultant?
So, as I said, my beginning in self-employment was training and development, and I did that for 25 years. I morphed from stand-up training when if you wanted colored visuals, you colored them in the night before with markers on the acetate. That's how long ago I was doing stand-up training. I moved from that to instructional design. I skipped over e-learning because at least when it first came out, I don't believe this anymore, but in the late 80s, late 90s, early 2000s, it was laborious. It was expensive. It was basically, flip the page and read yourself. The completion rates were abysmal. And so I just felt the ROI was not there for my clients. So I would never recommend e-learning. And I never learned how to use anything, Camtasia, any of those things, never learned them. But shortly on the heels after e-learning was virtual instructor-led training. And then I went all in because now you've got the best of both worlds. It's portable, but you've also got the accountability that you have to be there at a certain time with other people. You have the facilitator who leads it. And so I combined my instructional design knowledge with virtual instructor-led training. And for probably 15 of the first 25 years I was in business, I either taught companies how to change their thinking, because designing for online is entirely different than designing for the classroom. Or I was helping companies to actually take their content and translate it over to virtual instructor-led training. So I taught a certificate program for ASTD at the time. I taught a certificate program for Training Magazine. I designed like standard operating procedures for companies for their internal instructional designers, and then would train them. Because it's a whole different way of thinking. And what was really interesting, it was very cool. As I was making that transition from designing classroom training to designing VILT, I was working on 2 projects, 2 separate clients. And in the morning, I would do the classroom one. And in the afternoon, I would do the VILT one. And that's when it struck me that my approach to designing the training was entirely different. In the classroom, you design first for what's the facilitator going to say or do or ask them to do. And in the virtual instructor-led training, believe it or not, your first design is your slides. Because that's all they're looking at, right? And then what do I want my participants to do with the slides? And the facilitator role is so much smaller in virtual instructor-led training, because if you're not keeping people constantly moving and talking and collaborating, they'll check out. So your role is really to just keep sparking things. And so the facilitator guide, like the script, is just so much smaller, because really you're just saying, throw this question out, ask them to answer in chat, call, and choose 3 to expound on it. Like it's movement all the time. And as you know, classroom-based training, 4 hours, 8 hours back then. We've really shortened it now, but back then we would, you wouldn't send somebody to training if it wasn't less 4 hours. Why would you, take them off the job for 90 minutes? So VILT was great in that way too, because it was parsed out in much smaller increments. But a 4-hour class or an 8-hour class in the classroom does not translate to 4 hours or 8 hours in virtual instructor-led training. So that was another thing that people couldn't wrap their heads around. They'd be like, so this is a 4-hour class, right? And I'd say, I don't know. I haven't redesigned it yet. This could be a 40-minute class. I don't know. It depends on what your objectives are. And I'm going to get people to the same objectives, but it's not going to be the same class. So anyway, I spent a long time doing virtual instructor-led training. And then in 2015, the US Census came out and said that all the boomers were going to be out of the workforce by 2030. And I realized most of my clients were Fortune 500 clients. And I realized I had been inside of so many big companies and seen how they did their leadership development, and realized how badly they were doing it, because they were waiting till they promoted somebody to a leadership role and then giving them all the skills that they could have given them for the first 10 or 15 years, but they didn't. Or they were doing hypo programs, which I'm not a fan of, but that's a whole different discussion. But anyway, so I thought, you know what? I'm going to change tack. This was the second pivot. I'm going to change tack and just do leadership development for younger generations, because I know they're not prepared, and I know they're going to get promoted and are going to flame out because they haven't learned any of these leadership skills yet, because we thought, well, they're not going to be leaders soon, right? That happens when you're in your late 30s or early 40s. We've got time for them. But then when the boomers left, and then when the pandemic hit, more boomers left. All of a sudden, a lot of millennials got promoted, and they were not ready. So I did leadership development for a little bit of time. And then, like I said earlier, there are a lot of good facilitators out there, but not a lot of good instructional designers. I found the same to be true of leadership development. There are tons of good leadership facilitators out there. There's great curriculums for leadership development. But what I found was nobody was doing it purposefully or strategically. They were just throwing classes out there like, hey, let's give everybody feedback. I talked to a CLO of a global organization like 2 years ago, and she told me that they put 7,000 frontline managers through a 5-week online feedback class. I mean, I can't imagine what that cost, but I thought, that's just like throwing spaghetti against the wall, right? Like, okay, well, let's hope somebody learns these skills.
Want to raise capital for your deals without hitting dead ends? And Dealmaker had to easily raise unlimited capital for your deals. Business strategist and investor Dr. Harold Borja, that's me, unveils the proven strategies that successful deal makers use to secure funding, attract investors, and close deals with confidence. Whether you're a real estate investor, entrepreneur, or business owner, this book will teach you how to find and connect with the right investors, leverage networking, partnerships to access capital and secure funding opportunities, structure deals that make investors say yes, building lasting relationships that lead to more opportunities. If you're tired of struggling to fund your deals, this book will give you a clear, actionable roadmap to securing capital and growing your investments. The money's out there. Are you ready to get it? Grab your copy today and start making deals happen. Go to BorjaConsultingGroup.com. That's BorjaConsultingGroup.com for more information on launch date, launch party, and other events related to the book. Let's get it.
So I realized we're just at such a crisis point, such an inflection point in business with the boomers leaving, and they had the time to develop the skills because that generation stayed at their jobs for 30 and 40 years. So it was a slow build. We don't have time for that. And it really is more logical to train people in leadership skills when they're young, because I have a philosophy that the first way you learn something is the way you'll always do it. Even if somebody else tells you to change it up later, you'll still be like, nope, internally, that was the right way to do it. That's the way I learned it. So I thought what we really need more is somebody who strategically figures out how this company needs its leadership development done. It can't be generic. It can't be, send them off to a $4,500 program, which is very generic, right? Because as you know, and I know, people can't translate that back to the job when they come back. You want your leadership development to be done internally that achieves the goals and the vision and the mission of your company, the behaviors of your company. And so you need to do it internally, but you also have to have a strategy for it. You can't just say, oh, everybody's going to take this class or no one's going to take that class. So once I realized there was a better way to do leadership development and it needed to be done faster, I realized really what we're talking about is succession planning, because the boomers are leaving. The next generation is stepping up. They're not ready. Let's forestall this from happening over and over and over again. Let's get succession planning to be step one, and then the leadership development is step two. So again, since nobody was really doing it, then I just went all in on the succession planning, and it's a fascinating field, and very few people really do it as like their full-time job. That's all I do now, where a lot of companies will say, well, sure, we can do that. It's part of our HR consulting. I don't do any HR consulting. All I do is help you figure out your leadership pipeline, who's in it, where do you have gaps, maybe you have to hire from outside, what kind of person would fit in this organization, who needs what development to be where by year 3, year 5, what's the long-term plan of the organization, and then who do we have to have in the pipeline to get you there and be successful? Because I honestly think small companies are going to go off a precipice, because they're going to turn around one day and go, oh my gosh, there's nobody who knows how to lead a company, right? That's the other thing. I realized I was part of the problem, because all the years that I did instructional design, I designed for a role, a position. We didn't train anybody to be a business person.
Okay.
So who's left to actually knows how a business runs?
Right. Exactly. So, which segues to my next point. So, what is the difference between succession planning and a lot of people get it confused with exit strategy? Can you kind of clarify the difference between the two?
They do. I would say that succession planning is a part of exit planning, and most small companies, like owner, founder-led companies, which is my market now, think of succession planning as the same as exit planning. I'll give you a perfect example in a second, but they don't realize the people part of it. They think it's financial. They think it's, legal. How am I going to sell this? Who's going to buy it? How are we going to finance that? So I just started working with a client in the spring, 2 owner founders. They both want to retire, one in 2 years, one in 5 years, and they've chosen somebody internally to be their next CEO. So all sounds great, right? It's the next generation who called us and said there's no succession plan. And the CEO and the COO are like, yes, there is. We've already done the legal part, we've already done the financial part, and we've chosen you. So how can you say there's no succession plan? And the chosen CEO, the new one, said, I don't know what a CEO does. Like, there's no plan for making me a CEO other than like magic wand going poof, now you're the CEO. And that's the kind of situation I see over and over again, that the owners thought all we have to do is figure out how we transfer ownership to you and how the payment's going to happen, the legalities of it, and then we'll just walk out the door in 2 years and 5 years. And he's like, I don't know how this company runs. You've never, and he'd been there for 20 years. So they had plenty of opportunity to get him prepared. But they didn't. They kept him in his mid-level manager role. And so he was freaking out. So he called us, and then he had another person in the company who they chose to be the next COO. In tandem, they called us and they said, you have to help us because we can't convince these two that there's no succession plan. And we don't want to leave the company, but we also don't want to, run it into the ground because we don't know what we're doing.
That makes a lot of sense. There's a big difference there, right?
Big difference, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of a missing link that people don't think about. How will the company run after I exit?
Absolutely, 100%. You have this a couple of workshops. You have the Ignite 2-day, Lift, and Soar programs. Can you tell us the difference between, or tell us about those programs?
So it's really like a continuum. It's how much more you want to invest in your people and invest in the culture of learning in your organization. So it's Ignite, Lift, and Soar. My husband worked in aviation for 38 years, so it's kind of a play on that, right? So Ignite is where every client starts. It starts with a 2-day workshop. I go to them. All the senior leaders have to be in the room, and we figure out that succession plan. Who's in the pipeline? Is anybody coming up behind you? Is there anybody we could possibly get ready in 2 years, 3 years? If your intended retirement is that far down the road, or are we going to have to hire somebody from outside? And after that 2-day workshop, I create individual development plans for everybody in that pipeline. And also we expose the gaps where they might need to hire somebody from outside. The beauty, I think, of the Ignite, Lift, and Soar is you could stop at any point. That could be the whole engagement with the training doctor. Or if you wanted to go to Lift, my preference is to make that succession plan really standard operating procedure and a whole lot easier than, oh my gosh, we have to scramble and make a succession plan. We can help companies design their career paths so that when people enter the company, they know exactly what their career will look like for, I like to say, up to 20 years. But it's also coupled with a learning path. So here's how your career could progress, but you're also going to have to do all this learning at the same time. So you're creating better, well-rounded leaders, not just technical experts. And also there are a couple of diversions into lateral roles in our career paths as well. So that's the next step if you wanted to make it a whole lot easier, because now everybody's in the learning path, right? Everybody has a strategy for their development in your company. It also makes recruitment a whole lot easier because Gen Z is worried about security. They want financial security. They want career security. They don't just want a job. And so if you show up at a recruiting event and you have this piece of paper that says, hey, you could start here at level 1, but in 3 years, you could be at level 2. And by 5 years, you could probably be supervising others. However, you have to have these experiences and do this learning. That's very comforting to them. And it helps your retention because now they know exactly where they're going to be in 5 years or 10 years. They're not saying, well, now I'm bored. Now what? They know what. Right? Then they go back to the manager, go, okay, I think I'm ready for the next step. I forgot where I was going with that. But anyway, so it's good for retention, it's good for recruitment, and it's good for lifting, making everybody in a leadership pipeline. Not everybody's going to want to be the director of the department, but at least they all have the opportunity to do that, right? You're giving the opportunity to everybody, you're not picking and choosing. And then the SOAR is we facilitate peer learning groups for organizations because I'm a huge proponent of peer learning groups. And I think it's the easiest, fastest way to teach leadership development. If you have a regular schedule of, say, the second Tuesday of every month, everybody gets online in Zoom. we had a whole lot of leadership topics. We have something like 52 topics that they can choose from. And we just say, what do you want your folks to be better at this year? My number one is always, let's start with communication. Everybody can be a better communicator. Hi, Earl, just yesterday, I got 2 emails written by, I'm going to say Gen Zers. I don't know for sure. They were grammatically incorrect. They were syntaxically, is that a word? I even went back and read one again today, and I'm like, this makes no sense. Like, I want to show it to this person's boss and say, this is what this person is sending out on your behalf. Did you did you know that? You should probably be aware of that. So communication, you can't go wrong. Teach everybody better communication skills. And the real crux of the peer learning groups is we're teaching leadership skills. We're combining it with career paths. We're combining it with developing professional relationships. To me, that is the crux of it. So if you are in a peer learning group, we don't allow more than 12, so 8 to 12. No more than 2 people from every department, and it has to be a mixed cohort. So we're not going to do a peer learning group for sales and another one for marketing and another one for operations, because that's what we've been doing for 30 years. And so we have a whole bunch of people who are specialists and nobody who knows how HR works or marketing works or sales works. They don't even know who works in another part of their company. So while we're teaching them leadership development concepts, they're also developing relationships with other people in the company. So as you get higher in the organization, as you know, that's how you get work done. You get it done through others. If you don't know others, right, you might go and say, I'm going to sign this contract for $500,000. Maybe I should go to the guy in finance and say, could you look this, or the legal department, right? Could you look this over and just see if, I should be doing this. Is there anything I'm missing? But if you don't know anyone in that department, you're not going to call them and ask them. So I didn't say the real benefit. There's 3 benefits of the peer learning groups. The fact that we're developing relationships, the fact that we are continuously developing their leadership skills, and then the fact that it's part of their career development. And then we start with leadership as the peer learning topical area. But what I have found, which really surprised me, is a lot of the clients that I work with will say some variation of, I really can't promote anybody internally because they don't know enough about the industry that we're in. And I'm always like, that's on you. I mean, how long have they worked there? Why do they not? So we have people who are accountants and people who are graphic artists and people who are salespeople, but they're not vested in the industry. They don't really understand the industry. So if the client chooses, we can do a second meeting every month where all of our activities and learning are focused on the industry so that they have people who are more knowledgeable about the industry that they're working in as well. So Ignite, Lift, Soar, better.
Love it.
I used to say good, better, best. And I had a business coach who said to me, don't say that. Just say better.
Better. I love it. We're winding down, last 2 questions. So I found this on LinkedIn, or interesting stat, and I thought of you. So only 35% of organizations have a formalized succession plan for critical roles. 74% feel they're unprepared and lack the training and challenges, kind of like the example you gave me. And also 60% of executives fail within the first 18 months of being promoted or hired. So what are your thoughts on that?
Really?
I found it on LinkedIn.
Well, I'm going to say, because, it's my show. I'm going to say it's because you didn't prepare them to be leaders before you made them leaders. And if we just start, like you see my banner back here, leadership from day one, that's the tagline for the company. If you just start giving people leadership skills the minute they walk in the door, you're going to have people who are already leaders before you promote them into leadership roles. But we don't, for some reason. We promote you first and then say, okay, well, now we want you to change your behavior. Now we want you to know how to give feedback. Now we want you to know how to coach somebody. It's a whole different skill set, as you know. And we usually promote people who are technically good, which doesn't mean they're going to be a good leader at all. So why don't you have them technically good and also teach them those leadership skills early on? And if they like it, they'll naturally rise to a leadership role. And if they don't like it, you just made the whole organization better anyway. You didn't pick and choose who you were going to give leadership development to. And so that's kind of our philosophy, is you don't have to send them out to a training program. You can do these things easily, organically. The key is consistently. If you start the minute somebody walks in the door at 22, 23 years old, remember, the first way they learn something is the way they're always going to do it. So you're indoctrinating them into my company's way of doing things. As they get older and they become more responsible and they have leadership roles, they're still going to have the culture and the mission and the values of your company because you taught them the first way to be a leader. And I think that's why a lot of people, when they're hired in from the outside, don't fit culturally. It's not that they're unprofessional. It's not that they're wrong. They just were trained by a different institution. And so they've got, that was their first learning, right? So they've got that institution's values in their head, and they're trying to translate it to your company, and it doesn't work.
Exactly. No, makes sense. Makes total sense. So last question before I ask you like your contact information. What advice would you give a business owner to even think about succession planning?
You can't start early enough. I just gave a keynote presentation to a, get this, Professional Association of Irrigation Specialists. There is an association for everything. And the first thing I said to them was, you're already behind the 8 ball, because it takes a long time to develop leadership skills, right? It's not like you say, hey, you should have said that more, in a coaching manner rather than a dictating manner. And people aren't going to go, oh, okay, sure, I know what that means, right? You have to keep reiterating that, give them examples, mentor them. So it takes a long time to develop those interpersonal skills, those leadership skills. So you don't want to wait until somebody's in their 30s or in their first leadership role. Start it early. You can't start early enough.
I love it. I love that. Where could people find amazing interview, by the way? I learned a lot, and I'm sure you learned a lot from me and vice versa, right? So where could people find information about the training doctor?
So the website is trainingdr.com, like doctor, trainingdr. And the easiest place to find me is on LinkedIn, because I am the only Nanette Miner there. Sometimes you look up a name and you're like, I'll never find them. There's 40 people that have the same name. I'm the only Nanette Miner.
Nanette, thank you so much. I enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for being on my show today.
Thanks, Jairo. This was great.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed that episode with Nanette Miner. Amazing to tell her story. She has over 30 plus years of experience with succession planning and everything she's done to help small businesses. Please remember Deal Maker, how to easily raise unlimited capital for your deals. It's an amazing opportunity. You'll be available soon at BorjaConsultingGroup.com, BorjaConsultingGroup.com.